Danny Cole had always felt like he was living in someone else's shadow. And that shadow belonged to his father, Frank Cole, the most respected man in the small frontier colony of Ridgewater on the planet New Montana. The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across dozens of worlds. But New Montana remained a quiet place far from the busy centers of human civilization. And Danny liked it that way most of the time. He was 16 years old with brown hair that never stayed flat and hands that shook whenever he tried to do anything important. And he spent most of his days helping his father run the only medical clinic in town. Frank Cole was a retired military medic who had served in the First Contact Wars 20 years ago. And everyone in Ridgewater knew stories about his bravery and the lives he had saved under enemy fire. Danny had heard those stories 1,000 times. And each time he heard them, he felt smaller and more ordinary. "You have good hands," his father would tell him when they worked together on patients. "Steady hands like your mother had." But Danny never believed him because his hands trembled when he was nervous. And he was nervous most of the time. His mother, Karen, had died when Danny was just 7 years old during a pirate raid on a transport ship. And Frank had never been quite the same after that. The old medic buried himself in his work. And Danny grew up feeling like a ghost in his own home. Always present, but never quite seen. On the evening everything changed. Danny was cleaning the clinic after a long day of treating farmers with minor injuries and children with common colds. The sun was setting over the mountains that surrounded Ridgewater, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. And Danny paused to watch through the window. That was when he saw a streak of fire cut across the sky like a wound. And something massive crashed into the valley beyond. The town with a sound like thunder that shook the walls of the clinic. Danny dropped the cloth he was holding and ran outside where people were gathering in the streets and pointing at the smoke rising from the mountains. What was that? Someone shouted. "A ship," another voice answered. Something crashed out there. Fear spread through the crowd like a cold wind, and people began hurrying back to their homes and locking their doors. Danny stood frozen in the street as his father emerged from the clinic with a worried expression on his face. "Get inside," Frank said firmly. "Whatever that was, it is not safe." But Danny could not move because something was pulling at him. A feeling he could not explain, like a voice calling from the smoke and flames in the distance. "Danny," his father said again. "Did you hear me?" "Yes, sir," Danny replied. But his eyes stayed fixed on the mountains. That night, Danny lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling while the feeling in his chest grew stronger and stronger. Told himself he was being foolish and that his father was right about staying away from danger. But the pull would not let him rest. Finally, when the clock showed midnight and the house was silent, Danny made a decision that would change his life forever. He climbed out his window with a backpack full of basic medical supplies, things he had grabbed from the clinic without really knowing why. And he began walking toward the crash site. The night air was cold, and Danny shivered as he made his way up the rocky path into the mountains. But he did not turn back. 2 hours later, he reached the valley where the object had fallen. And what he found there stopped him in his tracks. It was a ship. But unlike any human vessel Danny had ever seen, the craft was long and elegant with curves that seemed grown rather than built. And its surface shimmered with scales that reflected the moonlight like liquid gold. The ship had torn a deep scar through the valley floor before coming to rest against a massive boulder. And smoke rose from cracks in its hull. Danny approached slowly with his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Section of the hull had been torn open by the crash, and through the gap, Danny could see movement inside. He climbed through the opening carefully, cutting his palm on a sharp edge but ignoring the pain, and found himself in a corridor filled with strange symbols and soft blue lights that flickered weakly at the end of the corridor. He found her. She was the most magnificent and terrifying creature Danny had ever seen her. body was covered in golden scales that had cracked and broken in many places, and dark blood pooled beneath her massive form. Her head was elegant and long with eyes that glowed like embers. And when those eyes found Danny, she opened her mouth to reveal rows of teeth as long as his fingers. "Leave," she said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "Leave now, human child." Danny should have run because every instinct told him to flee from this wounded dragon. But instead he took a step closer. "You are hurt," he said simply. "I am dying," the creature replied. "And those who hunt me will come soon, so you must go before they find you here." "Who is hunting you?" Danny asked. "The Vorn," she breathed. And pain twisted her features. "They want what I protect, and they will kill anyone who stands in their way." Danny looked at the wounds covering her body and saw that she was telling the truth about dying. Without the right care, she would bleed out within hours. And something in Danny refused to let that happen. "My name is Danny," he said as he knelt beside her and opened his backpack. "My father is a medic, and he taught me how to help people who are hurt. I am not people," the dragon said with what might have been dark humor. "I am Dracorian, and my name is Valeth." "Well, Valeth," Danny said as he pulled out bandages and antiseptic with hands that were somehow no longer shaking. "I am going to help you anyway." Valeth stared at him with those glowing eyes, and Danny thought he saw something shift in her expression. Something like surprise or perhaps wonder. "You are either very brave or very foolish," she said. "Probably both," Danny admitted, and then he got to work. Danny worked through the night with steady hands and a focused mind that surprised even himself. Valeth drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking in a language Danny did not understand, and sometimes watching him with those golden eyes that glowed like dying stars. The wounds were bad, worse than anything Danny had ever treated on his own. But he remembered everything his father had taught him over the years. "Pressure stops bleeding," Frank always said, "and clean wounds heal faster than dirty ones." Danny cleaned each gash with antiseptic that made Valeth hiss in pain, and he apologized every time, even though he knew it was necessary. He used all the bandages in his pack and then tore strips from his own shirt to cover the remaining wounds. And by the time the first light of dawn crept through the broken hull, he had done everything he could. "You should not have stayed," Valeth said weakly. "The Vorn will track my ship. Then we need to move you," Danny replied. "I cannot move," the dragon said. "I am too weak." Danny sat back on his heels and wiped sweat from his forehead as he tried to think of what to do. Next, he needed more supplies, real medical equipment and proper medicine. But all of that was back at the clinic. "I have to go home," he said finally. "I need better supplies to help you. If you leave, you should not return," Valeth told him. "Save yourself, human child, and forget you ever found me." Danny shook his head firmly and said, "I will be back. I promise." He made his way out of the crashed ship and ran down the mountain path as fast as his tired legs could carry him. And by the time he reached Ridgewater, the sun was fully up and people were starting their morning routines. Danny snuck into the clinic through the back door and began gathering supplies. Antibiotics and stronger bandages and painkillers and everything else he thought might help. He was so focused on his task that he did not hear his father enter the room behind him. "What are you doing?" Frank asked in a voice that was dangerously quiet. Danny spun around with his arms full of medical supplies and his face covered in guilt. "I can explain," he said. "Then explain," his father replied while crossing his arms over his chest. Danny had never been good at lying, and he was too tired to try now. So he told his father everything. He told him about the feeling that had pulled him toward the crash site, about the golden ship and the wounded dragon inside, about Valeth and the enemies who were hunting her. When he finished speaking, Frank stared at him for a long moment without saying anything. "You went alone into the mountains at night," Frank finally said, to help an alien creature you know nothing about, while enemies that could kill you were possibly on their way. Yes, sir, Danny said quietly. That was incredibly dangerous and foolish. Frank continued, I know. Danny admitted then Frank did something Danny did not expect. He grabbed a larger medical bag from the shelf and began filling it with more supplies than Danny could carry alone. What are you doing? Danny asked in confusion. If we are going to save this dragon of yours, then we are going to do it right, Frank said without looking up. I did not spend 20 years as a combat medic to let my son attempt field surgery with bandages and hope. Danny felt something warm spread through his chest, and he realized it was gratitude mixed with love for this man who had always seemed so distant. They made their way back up the mountain together, with Frank setting a pace that left Danny struggling to keep up despite his father being twice his age. When they reached the crash ship and Frank saw Valeth for the first time, he stopped and let out a low whistle. Wow, he said calmly. I have treated a lot of strange patients in my time, but this is a first. Valeth opened her eyes and looked at the older human with suspicion and asked, Who is this? This is my father, Danny said. He is a much better medic than I am. Frank was already moving toward the dragon with his bag open and his eyes scanning her wounds with professional assessment. The boy did good work, Frank said as he examined Danny's bandages. Better than good, actually. You would have bled out without these. He is stubborn, Valeth said. He would not leave. He gets that from his mother, Frank replied softly. They worked together for hours, with Frank teaching Danny as they went, explaining how to stitch wounds that were too large for bandages alone, and how to check for internal bleeding, and how to monitor vital signs even when the patient was not human. Valeth's body temperature was much higher than a human's, and her blood was a darker shade of red. But the basic principles of medicine still applied. By midday, Valeth was stable, and her breathing had grown stronger. You saved my life, she said to both of them. Why would you do this for a stranger? Frank looked at Danny and then back at the dragon before answering, Because my son saw someone who needed help, and he did not walk away, and I am not about to let him be braver than his old man. Valeth made a sound that might have been laughter and said, Humans are strange creatures. You have no idea, Frank agreed as the afternoon wore on. Valeth grew strong enough to speak more, and she told him about herself and her people. She was a guardian, one of the last protectors of the Dracorian sacred archives, ancient knowledge collected over millions of years that contained secrets of technology and history and power beyond human imagination. Vorn Collective wanted that knowledge to build weapons that could conquer entire galaxies, and they had been hunting the Dracorians for centuries. I was transporting a fragment of the archive to a safe location when they ambushed me, Valeth explained. I escaped, but my ship was damaged, and I crashed here. Will they follow you? Danny asked with fear creeping into his voice before Valeth could answer. Frank's communicator buzzed with an urgent alert from the town. A Vorn scout ship had been detected entering the planet's atmosphere. The hunters had arrived. The town of Ridgewater had never faced a crisis like this before, and panic was spreading through the streets like wildfire. Danny and Frank helped Valeth move to an abandoned storage building on the edge of town where she could hide while the colonists decided what to do. The dragon was still weak, but she could walk now, with Danny supporting her on one side. You should leave me here and protect yourselves, Valeth said as they settled her into the dark building. The Vorn will destroy this town to get to me. Nobody is leaving anybody, Danny said firmly. An emergency broadcast echoed through every speaker in Ridgewater as a cold alien voice delivered a message that chilled Danny to his bones. Humans of this settlement, we are the Vorn Collective, and we know you are hiding the Dracorian criminal. Surrender her to us within 6 hours, or we will reduce your colony to ash. This is not a negotiation. The broadcast ended and silence fell over. The town, before chaos erupted, people ran through the streets shouting and crying, while others rushed to pack their belongings as if they could. Somehow escaped Mayor Beth Dawson called an emergency meeting in the town hall, and Danny followed his father there while leaving Valith. Hidden in the storage building, the hall was packed with frightened colonists who all spoke at once until Mayor Dawson raised her hands for silence. "We need to make a decision," she said in a voice that trembled slightly. "The Vorn have given us 6 hours. What is there to decide?" shouted a man named Carl from the back of the room. "Hand over the alien and save our families." Several voices rose in agreement, but others pushed back. Deputy Sheriff Sam Finley stepped forward and said, "We cannot just surrender someone to be killed. What does that make us?" "It makes us alive," Carl replied angrily. "I have children to think about." The argument grew louder and more heated until Danny found himself pushing through the crowd toward the front of the room. He did not know what he was doing until he was standing before everyone with dozens of eyes staring at him. "I found her," Danny said, and his voice cracked, but he kept going. "I found the dragon in her crashed ship, and she was dying. And I helped her because that is what we do as humans. We help people who are hurt." "She is not people," someone muttered. "She is a person," Danny shot back. "She has a name and a life and people she cares about, just like all of you do. And the Vorn want to kill her because she is protecting something important. Something that could hurt a lot of innocent beings if the wrong people get their hands on it." The room fell quiet as Danny continued speaking. "I know you are scared because I am scared too. But if we hand her over just to save ourselves, then we become exactly what the aliens out there think we are. We become cowards who only care about our own lives." Mayor Dawson looked at Danny with something like respect in her eyes and asked, "What do you suggest we do?" Before Danny could answer, the doors of the town hall opened and Valith entered slowly with her golden scales. Catching the light, people gasped and pulled back in fear. But the dragon made no threatening moves. "I will speak," Valith said. "If you will listen." Mayor Dawson nodded cautiously, and Valith moved to stand beside Danny. "I am Valith of the Dracorian Guardians," she began. "For thousands of years my people watched humanity from afar, and we saw a species that was violent and chaotic and dangerous. And we kept our distance because we did not trust you." She paused and looked around the room at the frightened faces. "But then I crashed on your world and I was dying. And this boy came to me in the darkness, and he did not run away even though I am a monster by your standards. He stayed, and he helped me when it would have been so easy to leave me there." Her eyes found Danny, and something warm passed between them. "And his father came too. Not because he had to, but because his son asked him to. And together they saved my life with nothing but bandages and courage. And in that moment I realized that we were wrong about humanity." Vila's voice grew stronger as she continued. "You have a fire in you that my people never expected. A capacity for compassion that exists alongside your capacity for violence. And that makes you something special in this galaxy." She bowed her head and said, "I will not ask you to die for me. And if you choose to surrender me, I will not blame you. But I wanted you to know what your decision means. Not just for me, but for what humanity will become." The room was silent for a long moment before Frank Cole stepped forward. "I have contacts from my days in the military," he said. "People who owe me favors, people with ships and weapons who might come if I call them. How long would it take them to get here?" Mayor Dawson asked. "I do not know," Frank admitted. "Maybe too long. Maybe not." Sam Finley drew his sidearm and checked the charge before saying, "Then we hold the line until they arrive." One by one, other colonists stepped forward to stand with Frank and some off-armor. Named Pete grabbed a hunting rifle from the wall. A woman named Maria, who ran the general store, pulled out a shotgun. She kept behind her counter even. Old Howard, who could barely walk anymore, picked up metal pipe and said, "I may not be much use, but I am not letting these alien bullies push us around." Mayor Dawson looked at the growing group of volunteers, and then at Valeth, and finally at Danny. "Send the message," she told Frank. "We protect our own, even the ones with scales." Danny felt tears forming in his eyes as pride swelled in his. Just these ordinary people with their ordinary lives were choosing to fight for a stranger because it was the right thing to do. That was humanity at its best. Frank pulled out his communicator and began recording a message to old friends scattered across the galaxy. And Danny knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The clock was ticking and the Vorn were coming. But Ridgewater was not going to surrender without a fight. The 6 hours passed faster than anyone wanted. And when the deadline arrived, the Vorn made good on their threat. 3 landing craft descended from the sky and touched down in the fields outside Ridgewater. And soldiers in black armor began marching toward the town. Their commander was a tall figure named Torvax, who wore a helmet that hid his face and carried a weapon that hummed with deadly energy. "This is your final chance," Torvax announced through a speaker that made his voice echo across the valley. "Surrender the Dracorian now, and we may yet show mercy." From behind the barricades the colonists had built, Sam Finley shouted back, "We do not negotiate with people who threaten to murder innocent folks." Torvax made a sound that might have been laughter and said, "Then you have chosen death." The Vorn opened fire and the battle for Ridgewater began. Danny was stationed at the medical center with Valeth, who was still too weak to fight. And he could hear the sounds of weapons discharging and people screaming outside. Every few minutes someone would drag a wounded defender through the doors and Danny would do his best to patch them up before sending them back out or moving them to a recovery area. His hands moved without hesitation now, steady and sure as he worked to save lives. Frank was out there somewhere leading a group of fighters. And Danny tried not to think about what might happen to his father. "You are worried about him," Valeth said from where she lay watching Danny work. "He is all I have left." Danny admitted, "He is a strong warrior," Valeth replied. "I can see it in how he carries himself. He will not fall easily." An explosion shook the building and dust fell from the ceiling as Danny stumbled. The Vorn were getting closer. Sam Finley burst through the door with blood running down his face from a cut on his forehead. "They broke through the eastern barricade," he reported. "We are falling back to the town center, but they will be here soon." "How many did we lose?" Danny asked. Sam's expression told him the answer was too many. "Get everyone who cannot fight to the basement," Sam ordered before running back outside. Danny helped move the wounded to the lower level of the medical center. But Valeth refused to go. "I will not hide while others die protecting me," she said. "You can barely stand." Danny argued, "Then I will fight staying down." The dragon replied with a flash of her old fire before Danny could argue further. The front wall of the medical center exploded inward as Vorn soldiers blasted their way inside. 3 of them entered with weapons raised, and their black armor made them look like shadows given form. Danny grabbed the only weapon he had, his father's old service knife that Frank had given him years ago, and stepped between the soldiers and Valeth. "Get out of the way, boy," one of the Vorn said. "We only want the dragon. You cannot have her," Danny replied. And his voice did not shake even though his heart was pounding. The soldier raised his weapon, and Danny knew he was about to die. But he did not move. "Brave," the Vorn said. "Stupid but brave." Danny closed his eyes and waited for the end. But the end did not come. Instead, he felt something warm spreading through his body, starting from his chest and flowing outward to his arms and legs and head. His eyes snapped open and everything looked different, clearer and sharper, as if he had been seeing the world through fog. His whole lifetime seemed to slow down as the Vorn soldier fired. And Danny moved without thinking. He dodged the blast that should have killed him and crossed the distance to the first soldier before any of them could react. Knife in his hand found gaps in the armor, and he disabled one soldier and then another with movements that felt like dancing. The paling the base. Third soldier tried to retreat, but Danny was faster. And within seconds, all three Vorn were down, and groaning on the floor, Danny stood there breathing hard and staring at his hand in disbelief. "What happened to me?" The Ascadvilas voice came from behind him. Weak but filled with wonder. "I gave you a gift," she said. "When a Dracorian trusts someone completely, we can share our strength with them. I bonded with you when you saved my life, and now my power flows through you. Why did you not do this before?" Danny asked. "Because it takes everything I have left," Valeth replied. "And because you needed to find your own courage first before you could accept mine." Danny turned to look at her and saw that she had collapsed against the wall. Her golden scales dim and her breathing shallow, she had given him her remaining strength. "And it was killing her, Valeth," Danny said as he rushed to her side. "Do not worry about me," she whispered. "Use the gift. Protect your people." Danny did not want to leave her, but he knew she was right. He could feel the power burning in his veins. And outside he could hear the sounds of battle growing more desperate. He squeezed Veleth's hand once and then ran out into the chaos. The fight was turning against the colonists, and Danny saw defenders falling back on all sides as Vorn soldiers pushed forward. But now Danny was something more than a medic son. He moved through the battle like a force of nature, helping fallen fighters and disabling Vorn soldiers and rallying the colonists wherever he went. Frank saw his son fighting, and his eyes went wide with shock. But there was no time for questions. The Vorn commander Torvax noticed Danny too and began advancing toward him personally. "What are you?" Torvax demanded as he watched Danny take down another soldier. "I am human," Danny replied. "And humans do not give up." Just as Torvax raised his weapon for a killing shot, the sky lit up with new fireships appeared above Ridgewater. Sleek and fast and armed with weapons that rained destruction down on the Vorn forces, a familiar voice crackled over the town speakers. "Ridgewater, this is Captain Rosa Vega of the Freelance Peacekeepers. We heard someone needed help, and we brought friends." Frank let out a shout of joy as his old comrades arrived to turn the tide. Torvax looked at the sky and then at Danny and knew the battle was lost. "This is not over," he hissed before retreating to his landing craft. The Vorn Collective does not forget. As the enemy ships fled into the sky, Danny's strength finally gave out and he collapsed to his knees. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was his father running toward him with tears in his eyes. Danny woke up 3 days later in a bed at the medical center with his father sleeping in a chair. Beside him, sunlight streamed through the window and birds were singing outside. And for a moment, Danny thought maybe everything had been a dream, but then he felt the ache in his muscles and saw the bandages on his arms and knew it had all been real. "Dad," he said softly. Frank's eyes snapped open instantly, and he leaned forward to grab Danny's hand. "You are awake," Frank said with relief flooding his voice. "Thank God you are awake. What happened?" Danny asked. "Is Valeth okay?" "She is alive," Frank assured him. "Barely, but alive. Captain Vega brought medical supplies and specialists who know how to treat non-human species. She is recovering." Danny closed his eyes and let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. "How many did we lose?" he asked quietly. Frank's expression grew somber, and he said, 12 people died defending the town. Good people who chose to fight instead of surrender. 12 lives gone, 12 families broken." And Danny felt the weight of that knowledge settle on his shoulders. "They died because of me," he said. "Because I found Valeth and brought her here." "No," Frank said firmly. "They died because they chose to stand up for what was right. And that choice was theirs to make. Do not take that away from them by blaming yourself. Danny nodded slowly, even though the guilt still gnawed at him over the next few days. Danny recovered his strength and learned what had happened after he collapsed. The Vorn had retreated completely, and their forces had taken heavy losses from Captain Vega's ships. The freelance peacekeepers were a group of former military pilots and soldiers who took jobs helping colonies that could not defend themselves. And Frank had saved Rosa Vega's life during the first contact wars. She said she owed me, Frank told Danny. And Rosa always pays her debts. Ridgewater was rebuilding slowly, with help from the peacekeepers who had stayed behind to assist with repairs and security. The 12 fallen defenders were buried in a new memorial garden at the center of town, and their names were carved into a stone monument that read, "They stood when others would have knelt." Danny visited the memorial every day and spent time with each name, learning their stories from the families they left behind when he was finally strong enough to walk on his own. Danny went to see Valashee had been moved to a larger building on the edge of town where she had room to stretch her wings. And when Danny entered, she lifted her great head and smiled at him. "The hero awakens," she said with warmth in her voice. "I am not a hero," Danny replied. "You are wrong," Valeth said. "You are exactly what a hero looks like. Someone who is afraid but acts anyway. Someone who puts others before themselves. Someone who finds strength they did not know they had." Danny sat down beside her and asked, "How are you feeling?" "Weak," she admitted, "but alive, thanks to you and your people." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Valeth spoke again. "I must leave soon," she said. "I need to return to my people and warn them that the Vorn know about the archive fragment I was carrying." Danny felt a sharp pain in his chest at the thought of Valeth leaving, and he realized how much she had come to mean to him in such a short time. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked. Valeth's eyes softened and she said, "I hope so. But before I go, I have something for you." She reached out with one great clawed hand and gently took Danny's right hand in hers. "This may hurt," she warned before Danny could ask what she meant. Heat flowed from her palm into his, and he gasped as fire seemed to burn beneath his skin. When she released him, there was a mark on his palm, a symbol that looked like intertwined flames and scales, glowing faintly with golden light. "This is a Dracorian bonding mark," Valeth explained. "It shows that you are a friend of my people, that you saved one of us and earned our eternal gratitude. Wherever you go in this galaxy, you can show this mark, and any Dracorian will help you." Danny stared at the mark in wonder and asked, "Is this why I could do those things during the battle?" "Partly," Valeth said. "The bond we share allowed me to lend you my strength. But the courage and the heart, those were always yours. I just helped you see what was already there." Later that day, Frank found Danny sitting on the hill overlooking the valley where Valeth's ship had crashed, now cleared away by the peacekeepers. "She is leaving tomorrow," Danny said without turning around. Frank sat down beside his son and said, "I know." "I do not want her to go," Danny admitted. "That is how you know she matters." Frank replied. They sat together watching the sun set over the mountains, and Frank put his arm around Danny's shoulders. "Your mother would be so proud of you," Frank said quietly. "I wish she could have seen the man you are becoming." Danny felt tears forming in his eyes and did not try to stop them. "I was so scared," he said. "The whole time I was terrified. That is what courage is," Frank told him. Being scared and doing the right thing anyway. The next morning, the whole town gathered to watch Valeth leave. Her ship had been repaired by Captain Vega's engineers, and it gleamed golden in the morning light. Valeth said goodbye to Mayor Dawson and Sam Finley, and all the others who had fought to protect her, and she thanked each of them personally for their sacrifice. When she came to Danny, she knelt down so her great face was level with his. "You changed everything," she said. "Not just for me, but for the future of relations between our peoples." Word of what happened here is spreading across the galaxy. And other species are starting to see humans differently because of what you did. I just did what anyone would do. Danny said, No, Valeth replied gently. You did what very few would do, and that is what makes it matter. She pressed her forehead against his in a gesture that felt ancient and sacred. We will meet again, Danny Cole, she promised. I am certain of it. Then she boarded her ship and rose into the sky. And Danny watched until she disappeared among the stars. Frank came to stand beside him and asked, What now? Danny looked down at the bonding mark on his palm, still glowing faintly with golden light. I want to learn, he said. I want to train to be a real medic like you were. But also something more. I want to help people across the galaxy. I want to build bridges between humans and other species. Frank smiled proudly and said, Then that is what we will do. As they walked back toward Ridgewater together, Danny realized that he no longer felt invisible or ordinary. He was the boy who saved a dying dragon. And that was only the beginning of his story.